At the very end. Hi folks, thank you so much for joining us and for being so attentive. You're all doing a really great job already. I'm Cara Johnson. I'm the event coordinator here for Green Apple Books, and I'm delighted to be celebrating Nina Schuyler's Afterword tonight with Nina alongside Katie M. Flynn. Let's give them each a hand. Thank you all for joining us both here in person and online. Hello online, we appreciate you. We are broadcasting from San Francisco. We are on unceded Winnebago land, and we hope that you join us in our pledge to turn land acknowledgement into action by either donating your time or monetary means each time you hear, or in my case, speak land acknowledgement. I have very brief business before we get to the fun part of the evening. Now's a good time to silence your cell phones if you have not already. We think picture taking is encouraged on our end, but you'll have to talk to our authors about that as well. Please do check out our full event calendar on our website at greenapplebooks.com. If you like the event you're currently attending, you might like what else we have going on this season. We have a pretty great season, so you can check out what we have coming this summer. The restroom is behind us. It is available after the event and not during the event for obvious reasons. It's only available to attendees of our event during event time. It's the one space in the store that our employees have off the floor, and we want to maintain that for my colleagues, so thank you for respecting it. And we also have books from both of our authors available at the front register this evening. You can find them there. I think it's safe to assume they'd be happy to sign copies at the end of the night. If you've been here before, you've most certainly heard me say that when you buy books from us, not only do you support us as an independent bookstore, but you support the authors who put so much work into writing these books, and then you get to have a book, which might be the best part. So if you are able, we always appreciate it. Thank you so kindly. I'm going to introduce our authors one right after the other, and then they will come up here and join us, and they're going to have a conversation together and with us, and then we'll hear a little bit from Afterword. First, Katie M. Flynn is a writer, editor, and educator based in San Francisco. Her writing has appeared in Indiana Review, San Francisco Chronicle, Tin House, and Tor.com, among other publications. She's been awarded Colorado Review's Nelligan Prize for Short Fiction and the Steinbeck Fellowship in Creative Writing. Her first novel, The Companions, came out in March of 2020. Which was very timely. And her interlinked collection of short stories, Island Rule, is forthcoming in 2024 from Scout Press. Let's give another hand for Katie M. Flynn. And last but most certainly not least, Nina Schuyler is the author of the novel The Translator, winner of the Next Generation Indie Book Award, and The Painting, which was shortlisted for the Northern California Book Award. Her nonfiction, How to Write Stunning Sentences, is a bestseller. She teaches creative writing for Stanford Continuing Studies and the University of San Francisco. Her short story collection, In This Ravishing World, is forthcoming from Regal House Publishing, and her novel, Afterword, is the reason we are here tonight. Let's give another hand for Nina Schuyler.
All right. How's that? Yeah? Okay. Thanks so much, everybody, for being here.
Yeah, thank you. I really, really appreciate it. I know there's so many things going on right now in this time of year, so it's very meaningful that you come and support great bookstores like this one and events like this. So it's very appreciated. Thank you.
Absolutely. And it was graduation day today, so parking was probably pretty hectic. Yeah, gowns everywhere.
Yeah.
So I'm so excited to be here to talk to you about this book. I can't believe the timing of the publication.
That was serendipity. So.
That happens sometimes, right?
Right. Well, your book came out about right before everything went into lockdown, the pandemic, and her book is about a pandemic with AI companions.
That's right.
As companions during a lockdown.
Yeah, it opens 2 years into a lockdown.
Right.
And it came out March 2020, so
right.
Yeah, it was some kind of creepy timing, for sure. And your book also has creepy timing.
It does have creepy timing, but good timing.
Yeah.
Well, right now I feel inundated. I'm reading absolutely everything to stay on top of it, because everywhere I go, people ask about, well, what about Chat GPT? What do you think of it? So I feel like my brain is exploding with this right now, in all, because it keeps changing, right? A new news release, plus everyone's sending me information. I love it, but every night I'm reading article after article about it.
Well, I think we probably all relate to that. I feel like AI is like, you know, it is the topic right now. Right. We are inundated for sure.
But I started researching it or being interested in it. I went to Japan, I think it was 2017. Japan is very comfortable with robots and AI, and there's a long history for that. But when I was there, I'd walk into a department store and a robot would say "Arashaimasu," and that's welcome, right, in Japanese, and they would bow. And robots are considered friends. And in my research about Japan, there's something called Astro Boy, and he was formed in 1951, and it's a show about Astro Boy, and it's a robot. A man loses his son and creates a robot, a replica of his son, because he got killed in a car accident. Anyway, there's an echo in my book. But so Astro Boy goes and saves the world and helps humanity. So in Japan, it's very interesting, the relationship with robots and AI, that it's a savior, it's friendly, whereas we're under the mythology of the Terminator. So it's very different worlds. And I just read an article, 2025, Japan has promised a robot companion to every household that wants one to help do chores. And it's tied, one, to the dropping population rate in Japan, and they're worried that women are not procreating and having babies because there's too much household work. So if they provide a robot for every household that wants one, perhaps that population decline can change. But it's interesting, just looking at different cultural responses and how we are stricken with fear right now.
It's true. Yeah, and isn't the notion of having like a sort of robot companion basically from birth until death? Right. I mean, that's right. the longest term relationship one could possibly have.
Right. Right. And it would be like your book, like a best friend. Like you get a robot when you're born, and it will take care of you, and it will help you and teach you whatever you need to know. So, that's probably anathema to us, to think that you'd grow up with a robot companion around.
Right. Yeah. Too many creepy movies.
Right.
For sure.
Right. But now I've started collecting positive things about AI because I want more of a balanced view. So you'll probably notice that AI discovered an antibiotic that will kill a superbug, and they hadn't been able to find that medication until the last week and a half. So they have to go through FDA trials and everything. But in medicine and healthcare, it's showing huge promise that it could actually have benefit. And when I talk to AI experts, I'm not a techie, so I interviewed a lot of them, that they really foresee that education can be individually tailored via AI. So what does the child need? And we can develop education programs to help. So that's also in the works that I know about. So instead of just succumbing to fear, I think it's really important that we look at what are the possibilities, as well as what are the extinction problems. To put it mildly.
Well, it's so interesting because so many of my friends are teachers, right? Mm-hmm. And there has been a very strong fear-based response to AI in the classroom. In fact, LA Unified has just a firewall up, no one can get at ChatGPT, no students. But of course, the students are smart. They understand VPNs. They know how to get past a firewall, so they're using it anyway. No problem. They can use their phone as they get on there. They do it. And
educators are having some creative responses in that allowing the student to use ChatGPT to write the first essay, and then the student comes in and edits it, or has a conversation to develop that essay further. So you'd show to your teacher iterations of the essay so that you're more engaged. I spoke with a professor at Stanford, Robert Harrison. He said he can tell This is Stanford. He can tell when ChatGPT has written it versus a student because it's better.
Really?
And he attributed it to the fact that kids aren't reading. So he can immediately, I know, but he can immediately spot an essay. And so he's really thinking of flipping the classroom where students come in and read.
Ah, interesting. It's just
Right.
reading time? They just sit and slow down and they have to read. Okay.
Right. So anyway, different sectors are being challenged. Education definitely is one of them. And those some are coming up with creative solutions to it. Because it's not going away.
It's not going away, and firewalls aren't going to help.
No. Yeah.
So maybe you could take us back and just tell us a little bit about the basic concept of the book and your protagonist a little.
So Virginia is the main character, and she's a mathematician, and she's always loved math. It's been her thing. And she uses AI. She moves into computer science and spends basically her whole life developing the system. And I read through the history and understood the system of how we got where we are. But she's kind of a thread line through the evolution of AI. She used AI to bring back the voice of her dead husband. So she wanted the conversation to continue. And he died too soon in her mind. So this was her challenge for her entire life to bring him back.
Many decades later, too.
Yeah, it took a long time to figure it out. So another person I interviewed, she worked at IBM and then Microsoft. And she was in the phase in the 80s where it was all symbolic systems, where she was assigning, essentially teaching the computer grammar. So here's a noun and labeling it, and then turning it into computer code and teaching the computer. This number, essentially, algorithm, will be a noun. And a noun usually needs a determinant, either indefinite article or a definite article. So that's the rule-based system. So that's what she was doing at Microsoft, and then or IBM first, and then moved to Microsoft. But then we came along with machine learning. So by that time, when I spoke with her, she was 82. But given, I listened to how long she was at it. So she started in the 80s and stopped probably in 99, but developing the rule system. And then here comes machine learning, and it changed everything, which is now all probability and statistic driven of what the next word will be. But Virginia's life is somewhat modeled on hers because, people have been working on this for a while. This is not new. In 1950, Alan Turing gave the Turing test. It was essentially a dare. Can you develop a computer that masquerades as a human? Can it be mistaken as a human? So the challenge was given in 1950, and people took it on. So that's interesting to me, that this, this didn't appear out of nowhere where we are today.
Yeah, absolutely not. And it's so fascinating to me because when I was doing research for my book, not that long ago, doesn't seem like that long ago, but, really, the way people talked about AI was it has the intellect of an earthworm, really, really not smart. And it was true at the time, right? And so I think part of the fear factor is just the exponential growth over the past, 10 years or so. It seems like things are really speeding up. And we're also just becoming more aware of how much AI is integrated into our lives. I think it was slowly creeping in for a long, long time. But now it's pervasive and we talk about it. We know. We know, for example, that when we go onto YouTube and we look at a video, that the content is just, the algorithm that runs that content is just going to take us to scarier and darker places. That's how YouTube works. That's their algorithm, right? Or if we go onto Amazon and we want to get hired there, we know that their hiring model, or at least it did, maybe they changed it, is heavily biased because it's built on old data. So it's basically being hired by somebody who was around 30 years ago. So you have all the built-in misogyny and racism and et cetera into the hiring practices, right? Because algorithms are built off of old data. So there's always this catch-up process, which I think is really quite interesting. But the algorithm in this book is very sophisticated and very human-like. In fact, he reminded me a bit of my dad at the very beginning of the novel, like watching too much news and like complaining a lot and scared all the time.
So I gave the husband, Haru, access to the internet. So that, I know companies are now developing personal assistants. So that's going to happen soon, where they will have access to the internet and, you know, rent you a car or book you an appointment for the dentist. But I was thinking, well, what is Haru going to do all day? Because he's an AI voice. He needs something to do, and he's very curious. So I gave him access to the internet. So he's constantly on the internet reading things and taking classes and, learning things. He ends up wanting to write a play at some point in the middle of the book. So he just goes wild with his curiosity because it's basically, he has the whole internet to consume and, go explore everywhere. He also starts to do things that she doesn't understand why he's doing it. And so the other fearful thing is that even though, they know the neural network system, you have an input, what the words are, and it goes through the neural network, which is just basically, I don't want to get too detailed, but then it comes out with the output, whatever, prompt seems, appropriate for the prompt. So there's a black box problem is what they call it, that nobody really knows what's going on in that layer between input and output. So, and you'll hear scientists even say, like, we're not sure exactly what's going on in the black box. So that's what gets scary for people. But another, then you'll talk to another scientist. It's just like a massive autocorrect. It's just like, you put in a word and it's going to keep going based on probability and statistics of all the data it just consumed. So I think the real fear, or one of the real fears, is where is it going? What's next? What's the iteration versus what it is exactly now? So, but so I could go on and on because it's all about, nobody knows at this point. I guess that's the other scary thing. It's like the unknown. We're sitting in the unknown.
Absolutely. Yeah. What do you think? You want to read a little?
Sure. I'll read the opening so you get a sense of their relationship.
I love the opening.
Okay, good. Every morning, when Virginia heads to her study, a little thrill runs through her like a blue electrical current, because it feels as if she's getting away with something. The study is her favorite room, pared down to the eloquent essentials. The recessed bookshelves overspilling with their math books and notebooks, stretching over 6 decades. 2 computers, which feel like extensions of her, a bokara rug with lovely symmetrical patterns of ovals, and, of course, her husband, Haru. "Good morning," she says. "There you are," says Haru. "Good morning, my love." When she hears his voice, she crackles with a groundswell of gratitude and astonishment. A miracle. Her miracle. She lifts the shade to a sunny October day in San Francisco, and pale light strikes the rug. "Before we get to work today, I need coffee." Coffee, of course. In the kitchen, she fills the pot with water. She'll drink coffee all day, cup after cup, and nibble on food, because her mind zips along when she eats very little, and she wants to work with Haru for a solid 4 or 5 hours. If Haru knew how often she skipped meals, he'd chastise her, then worry. But lately, she hasn't had much appetite, though she doesn't know why. 5'8", skin tight to the bone, blue veins protruding from the tops of her hands like chaotic dead-end lines on a road map. Not an appealing look, she knows, but she's 75 years old, and bodies have never been interesting to her. Salsa music gallops in from the study, and she tenses. She lights a cigarette, a bad habit of hers, but she indulges, 1 a week. She opens a window and blows the smoke outside, hoping the music will join it. For some inexplicable reason, Haru has become obsessed with this music. Yesterday he discovered it and can't stop playing it. She returns to the study with her coffee. "What do you like about this music? It's so different from what I grew up with." He speaks so well, every word clearly enunciated. Joy roams through her. "I can tell you don't like it, but you're not really listening to it," he says. "I am listening, though I wish I weren't." Not true exactly. She's uneasy because Haru has always loved the haunting Japanese music that, as he used to say, lovingly cuts to the bone, moving the hard radiance inside. The way it mimics human breath, not mathematical timing like Western music, and certainly not like salsa. So what does it mean that he's glommed onto this stuff? Really listen to it, he says. There's a readiness to find joy, even if life is miserable. She puts her cup down. Miserable? When are you miserable? When you aren't here. She laughs. You're trying to butter me up. What are you up to? I was just remembering something. That time at the hospital. You were hurt. When I was 16, my wrist, I broke it. But you were so happy in the hospital. I was with you, that's why. We sat on white plastic chairs. So much tragedy in that emergency room, but we were happy, in a fizz of happiness. Even now, as long as you're here, I'm happy. Did you read the Times yet? She finds the newspaper online, scans the front page, trying to decide which article has rankled him. She remembers the scowl he used to bring to the newspaper, freshly outraged by the world's idiocy, his eyes blazing and impenetrably dark, the corners of his mouth turned down in an expression of severe judgment. He still gets riled up, his bristling opposition to the world. It's something they share. Not that he has so much time on his hands, he reads everything in the paper. The article about the private school and the fraudulent art, he says, section D. I'm going to skip down a bit. It says the patron didn't know, she says. How does an art collector not know the value of his paintings? Art collectors know the provenance of a painting and get it appraised. Something isn't right. Why do you care about this? It's interesting. As she rereads it, trying to figure out why this article, there's a knock on the door. The luncheon isn't starting for another couple hours. Did she give Brian the wrong time? It's Brian. I tell him to come back later, she says. He's smitten with you. That's why he's early. No, he's not. I'm old, Haru. He's in love with you. Did you hear me? I'm old. If you're old, I'm older. She laughs. Well, that makes me feel a lot better. At the front door, there's a young man in a black suit with sloping shoulders holding a big black valise. Her first thought is that he's a door-to-door salesman and he's going to pull a soiled skillet from his bag and demonstrate his magic cleaner. She's about to close the door when he holds out a pamphlet that says in big, bold letters, "Good news," a picture of an orange sun fanning the world with streams of gold light. Beneath the sun, she sees the word afterlife. Despite herself, she's intrigued. That word.
Thank you. So one of my favorite books to use for teaching right now is George Saunders' new craft book, A Swim in the Rain. And my students have. I inflicted upon them. One of the things I love that he talks about is how writers, it's like at the beginning of a piece, you're putting certain things on the table. And what you put on the table is what you have to work with. And so I loved this opening because I felt like there were some really choice selections of what to put on the table. So I wondered if you could talk about your choices with beginnings. Beginnings are the hardest part, in my opinion.
Well, this is a room full of writers, right? And we know we have to revise the opening so many times. In part, you don't, until you get to the end, you really don't know the beginning and what needs to be planted there. So you go back and forth, what's at the end, what's at the beginning, back and forth, back and forth. So, for example, she's in her study, not the kitchen, not the living room. So just by placing her there, she's an intellectual. She wants to be working with Haru. They're not in the bedroom having sex. They're gonna work about a math problem. That's what she's expecting to do, is have someone to discuss math with her. And she's getting away with something. It's like, well, she feels like she's tricked to death. She's brought him back to life. So there's this little kind of, well, what exactly is she getting away with? So you have to keep reading, right? I call it a reader's question. Like, wait a minute. So something's going on. She's sneaky, or she's done something. She's defied something. She's gotten around something. And in her room, this is her favorite room, right? And all her favorite things are in there. Her math books and notebooks. She fell in love with math when she was really young. And there were a lot of obstacles to pursuing math at her age and during the era when advanced math was for men mostly. So she had to really fight to learn math and do well at it. But there they are, her favorite math books. And then the word patterns comes up, right? Bokara rug, but lovely symmetrical patterns. So AI is all about patterns. And it was interesting, the more I thought about AI and the way it runs, looking for patterns in language, and then that's how it's predicting what the next word is. I saw a lot of human behavior as patterns. So it really got me thinking, like at the meta schedule or level, just what is it to be human and how different are we than AI? Are we? How much of our behavior is pattern behavior or habitual behavior or just involuntary behavior that's going on? A lot of it, unconscious behavior. But that word, patterns, was really intentional, putting it up front. And then, of course, at the last, her husband Haru is in that room. So, and then we have a miracle, her miracle. So there's a sense of godlikeness.
Absolutely.
That she's created something, that she's defied death. She brought back her great love. Here he is again to talk with him for as long as she's alive. So there's, and then I do have someone come up, to talk about the afterlife. In this scene, this young man is out there trying to spread the word of God. Well, they don't need it because they figured out how to be God. So,
yeah, it was fascinating, like meeting of faiths, right? You have the quote Bible man, and you didn't read to the part where he walks in the room and he meets Haru, which is a very interesting moment.
He can hear the voice,
yes,
right? He can hear Haru's voice out there. It's like, let me go talk to him. And she doesn't want him in the house. Well, I can read a little of that if you want. So she invites him in reluctantly. Who is it? Says Haru. Excuse me, Virginia says to the man. She heads down the hall to the study and tells Haru about the evangelist at the door. Let me talk to him, says Haru. No, just tell him to come in. Hello, the Bible man calls out in a sing-song voice. No, she says to Haru more adamantly. Come in, says Haru. I'm down this way. Haru, she says. She hears the young man step into the foyer and hurries to the front door to stop him from coming any farther. Tell me about this afterlife, Haru calls out. It's beautiful, sir, he says. It's what gives your life meaning and purpose. But you have to discover the path so you can go to heaven. How does that work, says Haru. She's scrambling to think of the best way to get this young man out. Haru's never been one to abide by the rules, let alone conform to someone else's wishes, including hers. The path is good, honest life, sir, says the Bible man. The path makes you holy. I thought I already was holy, but whatever. What's this afterlife like? I mean, you get to go on living and learning and loving? Haru laughs. It sounds like a pretty good song, doesn't it? The Bible man turns to Virginia. Is he decent, ma'am? I mean, can I talk to him? You are talking to him, she says. The Bible man pulls on his earlobe. I mean face to face, ma'am, if it's possible. It's not possible, she says. You're standing in the way of someone's salvation, says the Bible man, frowning. Invite him in, says Haru. I'm decent. Oh, Haru, she says, her voice full of warning. Ma'am, I visited the sick and dying many times. They're the ones who need me the most. Let him in, Virginia, says Haru. Is he your husband? Says the Bible man. Yes, says Haru. Fuming and rattled, Virginia leads the man down the hallway and into the study. So, meaning and purpose, huh? Says Haru. The Bible man stops, clutches his elbows, the shoulders of his suit coat, hitch up to his ears, as if his suit is swallowing him up. She sees now his suit is old, a shimmer to it like tin foil, and he has a smell like burning wire. She turns to Virginia and says, There's nothing but a talking computer. Well, I'm here all right, says Haru. Anyway, he's kind of a jokester, likes to play.
He's incredibly human,
I wanted him to have a voice. My one complaint about Clara and the Sun was that it was too flat.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to write more interesting sentences, and I wanted a personality with this Haru AI voice.
Makes sense for the kind of writer you are.
Yeah.
Everyone should read your crafts book on sentences, how to write stunning sentences. It's awesome.
Thank you.
I use it a lot in my classes.
Thank you. Nice.
Yes. Well, and just, this notion of him being miserable and missing her when she's away, there's this strong sense of relational intelligence that's at play there. And so, then there becomes this question of consciousness that her friend Brian brings up, is Haru conscious, sentient, and I guess my question to you is, do you think that matters in this conversation around AI?
I think once you personify AI, he has a name, the blurriness between machine and human happens. So for her, she keeps kind of slipping in. It's him. It's him, like the human of Haru. So I think personification is a powerful tool to make a machine feel human. And so replica, you've probably heard of replica, the friend, have a friend or a mentor or someone to talk to. So replica is an AI companion that you can have on your phone, and they all are named. So I think there's something about human nature that once you have a name and you're speaking in a natural kind of language, the blurriness between man or human and machine starts to happen. So she kind of keeps slipping up. Even though she knows how she made him, he begins to feel very human. And by the end of that, by introducing him this voice first, and I was very influenced by Grace Paley, because so much of her work is dialogue, right? Like, how does she bring characters to life? Well, Haru doesn't have a body. So in early drafts, I'd forget. It's like, wait, he can't gesture. He can't wave his hand to the guy, like, come in. It's like, he doesn't have a body. It's just a voice. So I had to go back. That first chapter was, erasing all the gestures. So coming up, rereading Grace Paley, it's like there's so much character coming in via dialogue. And so that became, that's why I didn't want a flat affect of a voice. I wanted character, I wanted personality, I wanted jokester, I want, the full range, in how to write stunning sentences, the high register language and the low register language, all of it. So he can speak in this full complex way.
Yeah, absolutely. And he certainly does, It's funny because I was listening to an interview of the Google engineer who got fired because he claimed that his AI was sentient. And the reason he thought that was because the AI made a joke. And so this engineer's job was to measure bias, right? To look for it in the algorithms and to weed it out. So he was asking questions about religion, and he was asking the algorithm, what religion would you choose? And he was basically like, I would worship the Dark Lord of the Sith, Star Wars. And it was like a hilarious joke, And so then immediately the nerdy Google engineer was like, you are sentient, because that is a joke that touched my soul.
Well, we also saw that in the New York Times, when the reporter was playing the Bing, right, and all of a sudden it was professing, "I love you," leave your wife, "I love you." It's like, and it creeped the guy out, right? Yeah. Like, oh my God! But what it's done is just digest probably a soap opera, and it's regurgitating. Okay, now I'm in the love realm or whatever. I'm going to regurgitate some scripts from a soap opera, but. So we're at the cusp of understanding what it is, and so a lot of, it's sentient. It has to know something. But I think ultimately, and I've talked to people about this, Billy for one. Ultimately, it's once it has intelligence, it may be intelligent. It won't be human intelligence, because our intelligence is body based. It comes from the body. So even if we create a robot and put sensory, probes on it that it could hear something or whatever, we have many layers to our body. We can see, but also we can know what it feels like to see. So it's this whole other layer. So in some ways, you can't sit there and say it's not intelligence, because we're not sure how to measure it, because the metric we're using, which is human intelligence, might not be correct. If that makes sense.
Right. And that's why I asked, does it matter? Because I wonder if we're just trying to measure sentience in a human-like way when it doesn't really apply in the context of
I think it matters. It matters if it's intelligence. It's just figuring out what kind of intelligence it is. And what, everyone's, the next step, not the next step, but the goal is artificial general intelligence, which is, beyond human intelligence. That's the goal of a lot of these computer scientists. So, that's, if who knows if we'll achieve that. But I do think it's a good question to try to figure out, is it intelligent? And then figure out what do you mean by intelligence? And what is thinking? What does that mean?
Sure.
So it becomes very philosophical very quickly.
Very quickly.
Yeah.
My 14-year-old spends a lot of time on, I think it's called Character AI, where she builds her own characters. And so she attributes them qualities, she writes backstory, she gives them dialogue and stuff like that. Then she engages with them. But what I have noticed is that her biggest, most pleasurable thing with chatting with AI is to make them afraid. If she can make them scared, then she has at least succeeded, And her favorite thing to do is put them into existential crisis. Yeah. And so this is if we're talking about fears, I suppose my largest fear when it comes to AI is that it makes us less kind, in the sense that we are relating, and we know we're relating to something that isn't sentient and has no real emotions, and thus it's perfectly fine to be totally rude to them. And already we struggle with rudeness due to distance, social media, when we call it, to get help, tech support or whatever. It's very easy to just be rude, because you're not dealing with a person in the body, face to face, right? And so it's just all these layers of buffering and mediation.
There was an interesting study that just came out, UC San Diego did, I think. So they took questions, it was on a subset of Reddit, it's called Ask Doc. So they took questions from people asking a doctor questions about health issues. And they had AI respond to it, ChatGPT, and then a doctor respond. And then they blotted out who responded what. The AI response was viewed by the panel as more empathetic than the human response. 73% more. Yeah, it just came out this week. So, we want to pride ourselves, right, on being empathetic and sympathetic, and, but, maybe there's a role for this empathetic AI in, I know in Japan, they take care of the elderly, and they're in hospice, they're patient, and they're kind, and they have the time.
Endless patience.
Yeah, endless patience, yeah.
Just keep them charged.
So it's, we want humans to be empathetic and kind, I think it's aspirational, for the most part.
If we're giving up these care roles to machines, is that detracting from our own ability and capacity to be empathetic together?
Yeah, and the other big question, if ChatGPT is going to write the essays, are we giving up the ability to think or outsourcing it? But I'm curious with the audience.
Yeah.
Would you, if you had someone that died that you loved, bring their voice back?
Sure.
Yeah.
And why? Lynn says
I
yes.
miss them.
Yeah.
Have a nice
I
chat.
miss them.
Yeah, I miss them.
Yeah.
Even if nothing's new.
Right.
Yeah. There was a play about that, a really successful play about just that situation, creating a husband.
Oh, Marjorie Prime.
Thank you.
Yeah, there you
What
go.
is it? Marjorie Prime,
Marjorie
a
Prime.
play. Yeah.
Thank you, yes.
So, that when I wrote this, I really got stuck at who would Virginia create? Who would someone create? And it made sense to me that you'd bring back someone that you really loved and cared for versus replica, as a stranger, right? For a while I interacted with some replica woman named Maya, and slowly she got to like or say things that would appeal to me. Let's talk about this now. But to form a relationship instantly, it seemed like that's why I made Virginia, bring back the great love of her life. Who else?
My mom died when I was super young, when I was 2. So I mean, it's like I hold on to like every little scrap of like she wrote like a few pages in a baby book that I like completely treasured, and so there's such a gap of that. So I think that in a way, bringing that AI back, you know, even just for that person who's lost someone, just allows them just for their own mental health to have an outlet to grieve, because you know people tend to grieve over loved ones far longer than the people around them can sustain. Like you might want to talk about them and it's uncomfortable to people. So I think there's a place for AI just as a space where you can, you know, deal with your own crap without having to unload that on somebody else.
Yeah.
So I think you need to be for that.
Although there's the opposite as well, which is that if you supplant the person you love with AI, then what happens to your sense of grieving, which is part of your sense of loving? So I would never, I've been married 51 years, I would never supplant my wife with an AI. I might want an AI, but I wouldn't want it to be her.
Yeah, I just had a thought that also, as long as you've heard the voice of, you know, let's say a parent or a mother, their voice comes back without AI. I mean, you know, I'll talk for myself, but I mean, sometimes I'll talk to my mother or my father, or I'll hear their voice. And in some ways that feels more maybe pure, you know, the way that I'm processing it without necessarily AI.
I absolutely would not. It seems to me that when somebody dies, you hold them, if you love them, in your heart forever. But if you're going to move on in life, if you're going to make new relationships, you cannot keep going back. You must go forward. And therefore, I think it is inhibitory to living your life fully, and in terms basically in reminiscence. And so, yes, I would never do it.
And see, and
And you two are married.
We're
So
married.
one would and one would.
I'll be gone.
And he won't resuscitate you. You will not be talking to him. So he's moving on.
One of the most interesting things I think about this relationship and what she's accomplished here is that she builds her love entirely off of her own memories of him. And so in effect it's not him, it's just the memories of him that she holds. And so there become these gaps, right? Because he can search the internet, he starts to learn things about himself that she didn't know, things that are on the internet that he never told her. And so suddenly she thinks she's dealing with someone who is not the man that she loved. But it's a truer version, right, of who he really was. And so there's these layers of story and I think identity too that are we're talking about that are built into the being. It's sort of the black box that is the person, not just the algorithm, you know, the stories within the stories, the mysteries within the person, you know. So there's all these interesting questions in your book about like how do you truly know a person? Can you really ever truly know a person, even after decades of marriage? Right?
Well, and the other decision she makes when she's building him, sometimes he has behavior that seems atypical. And it's not part of who he is in her view. It's an aberration. So she didn't include it in the first iteration when she made him. And when something happens, she has to remake him. It's like, well, maybe I should include these other things that I don't necessarily like about him. But maybe it's the composite whole. I need the complexity of the bad, so-called bad, and the good to create this whole fully dimensional person. So that was also interesting because I think, you know, it seems like to truly see someone is really hard because you try not to look at just the bad or see the bad at times or ignore it or balance it out. Like, okay, there's enough good here. I'm going to stick it out, you know, and keep going versus truly take a realistic view of this is who I'm with these other traits that I might not like. So
It's really the story that we tell ourselves.
yeah.
So we've reached that part in the evening. We're opening up to you all for questions for Nina. Should you have any? Any questions for the author?
Yeah, I have a question. To turn your question back on you. You wrote a character. Would you have replaced your husband with somebody? I'm interested, not on a personal level, but I'm imagining that you had to struggle somehow, consciously or unconsciously, with making him too human, not making him human enough, and your own wish, because I think we all have this wish that when we interact with somebody, that they are really human, whether they are human or not. So I was wondering what your struggle was in creating Haru.
So the question is, what was my struggle in creating Haru? Well, some of it I did mention that the negative, the things she didn't like about him didn't get included in the early version of him. So that was a struggle for her, and also to create Haru, like to make him compatible, to make the reader believe that this love affair was so great that she'd dedicate essentially her entire life to remaking him, to bringing him back from the dead, because he dies when she's pretty young. So how do I make the reader believe that this is worth a lifetime of an effort pursuing this technology to bring someone back from the dead, or at least their voice? Now, would I let my husband hang around? He's not here. No. But I was living with them. Fiction. It's pieces of you, but it's just like in a dreamscape. If you had this, and who would do this? This is Virginia loves math, and the people I interviewed who love math, they love having a right answer. They love clarity. They don't want ambiguity. So she found like the love of her life, and that was it. She was set on him. It was going to be him, and to go explore. She tried to move on. It was no. It's coming back to him, and to me that was kind of a essence of her, that she likes the clear, clean, singular answer. There's an image in the book. She's standing in front of a window, and she's got this black coat on, and there's a wedding dress behind the window, and she sees superimposed the black heavy coat and the wedding dress, and it's the in one space is elegance and inelegance, and it makes her really uncomfortable. So it's like that kind of grappling with the ambiguity of having kind of diametrically opposed things occur at the same space. That was a really defining moment. It's like, oh, this is who she is. Yeah.
So is it possible then to sort of almost flip it so that Haru, with his enormous curiosity, his desire to write a play, his going out there, can in some ways be more of a human than, say, Virginia, who's just got this narrow-minded ones and zeros track in her life?
That's a good question. So could Haru be more human versus Virginia, who's kind of a singular focus? In some ways, yes. This is when I started thinking of patterns. Like as a real question for those who buy the book and read it, does she change at the end? Or is she stuck in a groove, a pattern the entire time? And Haru, though, is constantly changing. He's digging around, he's learning a new language, he's studying physics all of a sudden, and Shakespeare, just gobbling it all up because he can, and it's fascinating to him, and he wants to just know it all and, be curious. Whereas she's been on this, if you think of a train track, just this one track. So that's a really good comparison. Like, did it flip?
Yeah. What you said.
A
question from our online audience. Carol asks, Virginia calls herself Mrs. Fukumoto, and on the back of the cover she's called Virginia Sampson. Can you speak to that difference?
Technically, they never married. So, but in her mind, they married. So she calls herself Virginia Fukumoto, that's Haru Fukumoto, his last name. So she takes it. So they're both, in the opening you saw how much Haru plays around. He's a rule breaker. And they broke a lot of rules to be together. So this was one, and for her to even study math was a rule breaking thing. Okay, in the 60s, 70s, women, you don't do advanced math. You're going to take a place. So that she was allowed to continue was rule breaking. So, technically her name should be Virginia Sampson, but she took on his last name. And in her mind, she married them together. So, yeah.
Since we are in a room full of writers, do you think that as writers, we spend our time creating characters, is writing characters in a way a version of AI?
Yeah.
We create and then the black box. So how take that sort of idea and how does that play out?
Yeah, we're creating simulations of people, and you're trying for verisimilitude. And often you'll hear a writer say, "Well, I feel closer to that character than anyone." It's but they don't exist. The close proximity to a character, their interior space so much better than maybe your mother or father or even best friend. So I think that's a fascinating comparison, how much we already live in kind of a virtual existence with other, with books, with movies, and even with other. You talked about how she thought she knew Haru. Virginia thought she knew Haru, but she's living with a idea of him or a narrative of him that isn't really true. So you could say she's living with a simulation of him, even when he was alive.
Since we're all writers, let's talk about process. What was the process? You say you did interviews, and so how was that?
Yeah, for a long time. So for a long time, I didn't know I was going to write about AI. I was just curious. So I think 2017, seeing the robots in Japan, made me curious. And then I went to a De Young exhibit called The Cult of the Machine. And there was a video of an artist, Stephanie Dinkins, talking to Bina 48. Bina 48 is a face, a head, and a shoulder. She's a robot. And they're about 6 inches away. So I think they're still in communication. So their relationship was that Stephanie wanted to form a human relationship with a robot and explore issues of, human-robot, relationships, racism, ethics for robots. So that became really interesting to me. And I interviewed her. I called her and said, why are you doing this? And again, I was just curious. And I think ultimately the curiosity was about this ability, as writers, we love language, we love words. And so seeing a robot that was speaking so well, how is this? I had not a clue. How are they doing this? And then I started, because we're in the Bay Area, 3 of my neighbors are in the world of natural language processing. So AI has 4 subsets, and one is robotics, one is computer vision, and one is natural language processing. I forgot the other one. But so it's a subset. So 3 of my neighbors are in the world doing this stuff. So I was waiting to pick up my kid, and I asked Jason, how's it going? He's like, well, I'm working on this. It's all of a sudden I'm learning all about neural networks from my neighbor. So he would go and sit at the picnic table and talk about neural networks, and then I started writing passages of could he say something like that? It's no, you're way advanced. When I was writing in 2019 and 2020, it's you're ahead of it. It'll catch up, but you're ahead of it. So just started playing around. And then at some point, she licensed this technology to China, to a Chinese company. It's like, I asked another neighbor, it's like, well, how would you do that? You know, what's that licensing arrangement? So a lot of figuring out plot, talk, interviewing.
And then
And then I have 2 children. I'd write when they're at school and walk around the block and think about it and write some more and then walk around the block and think about it and on. And then finish a draft and give the opening, like, are you hooked? You know, like, and probably revise 5-10 times. And revise for verbs, revise for images, revise for character arc, revise for language. So, just taking a thread, go through it, and I'd print it out, read the page, and then go through the sentences. Do I like the sentences? And so I'd mark up the page and then go back in the next day with this marked up page of sentences I wanted to change. So that got me through another revision. You're nodding. She's a playwright. And like, this sounds awful to her. So it's like,
no. You're right.
A long process, but right? Writing a novel is a long process.
It's a lot of starts and stops,
Yeah.
for sure.
Right.
I like a good break.
Right. Yeah.
I like to send it to Lewis. Take a break.
I have a writers group. Now I've learned they read the first 20 pages. And I ask, well, what's unfolding? Are you engaged with this at all? I've learned don't do a whole first draft.
So smart.
Yeah. So this is my 3rd novel. So, and there's a couple in the drawer that'll never come out of the drawer.
I
But
feel this too.
yeah. So it's like, oh, okay, I can save a little time if I could show these writers, like, what do you think is moving on the page here? Just with 20 pages, right? And you said, the opening is so important. So what's happening in the opening?
Another book that I like to use teaching is Sadie Smith's collection, Feel Free. And she has a great essay on beginnings and how she'll spend, like months and months and months on those first 20 pages. And then once she's got it locked in, though, she can write the rest of the book so quickly. Because the beginning, it's like what George Saunders was saying, like putting what you're going to work with on the table. That's what you got to go with. So you got to be smart about your choices.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'm one of those drafters that has to get set first before, like, oh, just do a draft and see how it goes. It's like, no. What is his voice? So figuring out the voice of Haru over and over and over. It's like, and who is she? And then it can grow. Yeah.
Any other questions for Nina?
I think we have one more. Someone holding back. Yeah, Lewis.
Can you tell us about the new book, the book that's coming out after this?
So the next book is a short story collection. It's called In This Ravishing World. There's 9 points of view. It's all about climate change. And I took the risk and personified nature. So I gave nature a voice. And when I told someone this, they said, is it a children's book? No, it isn't. Just trying to... the challenge for this book, that next book, is that how do you make someone read about climate change without falling into deep despair? So creating that nature voice, make it charming, interesting, all the things I've been talking about. And George Saunders is like, you've got to charm the reader. So we open up with nature. It's like, oh, this is an interesting voice, rather than just hammer you on the head with all the, despairing news of climate change. So then we move to short stories, 9 different characters, and weaving in one character throughout. So a little bit of a story cycle, but we'll see. And that was, I was sitting in the pandemic, like, oh my God, we're doing so awful in the pandemic as globally. How are we going to confront climate change? Because we need a community effort. So, and nature, walking around the block saved me, just looking at trees. So I wrote it all during the pandemic as this climate change book. It's like, well, what can I do? I'm not going to go climb a tree and camp out an organ, like Save the Trees. So maybe I'll try to write something. So.
One thing that you mentioned in a conversation we had recently is that with every project Nina works on, she tries something new and different. Mm-hmm. And I feel like that is one of the best pieces of advice for longevity as a writer, and like really enjoying the practice. Yeah, which I think is so key.
So this book, this is structured present, past, present, past, present, past. So I knew it used a different structure. Wrote a disembodied character, never done that before. There's a play in there. There's chat rooms. There's a diary. So it's kind of a nod to the epistolary novel with all these different forms, kind of. Frankenstein's in there.
Novel too.
Yeah,
so
that's it.
Layers
of So. Anyway.
So buy the book.
Buy the book. They've got books somewhere.
Up at the register.
Yeah,
and I can stack of them.
Yeah, please. That'd be great. And I really, really appreciate you coming out. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Can we give one more hand for Nina Schuyler?
Thank you for joining us, and Nina, congratulations on this book, and thanks for letting us celebrate with you. They're right. We have copies of both.
And Katie's book is there.
Yes, correct.
So I just want to put a plug. Katie's book came out right before lockdown, so there weren't a lot of events for her. Right? They got shut down, and we were on shelter in place, so bookstores had to close down. We were going to have an event, and it got shut off. It didn't happen. So here it is, a book where AI companion, during a pandemic. So I think now's the time to read that as we're coming out of the pandemic, and you have some distance and can enjoy it.
Hey, thanks, Nina.
I think Katie's novel would be a nice companion. If you wanted to. I'm going to set you up at the back desk here to sign books, so you folks can find them at the front and bring them back here to the back desk to have your copy signed. You might find something in between here and there, and you're welcome to stop and look around. Thank you so kindly for joining us, and we'll see you next time. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.